the marketing you do on your social media channels is actually going to influence the type of talent you attract. If you truly care about growing a successful business, you will hire people with different skill sets who are more experienced or more of an expert than you are. Hello, and welcome back to the Beauty Industry Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Kennedy. Now, before I dive into today's episode, I have a crazy personal decision that I've made that I want to share with you. So if you know me, I have been a die-hard eyelash extension fan for 8 years. I literally never had a break with them aside from the COVID period where for 3 months businesses needed to shut down. And I finally made the decision to get rid of my eyelash extensions, which was a long time coming. I'd been umming and ahhing it. And the reason being is I didn't think I would actually look beautiful without eyelash extensions. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy or silly. However, coming from a background in beauty pageants, modeling, being in the beauty industry, used to do lashes, it kind of became a part of my self-identity that I had to have eyelash extensions to look the part or be perceived as beautiful. And as much as these beauty services are usually promoted as self-care, for me, it was actually coming from a deep place of unworthiness and not having self-acceptance for the way I am naturally. And after working with my mindset coach, Kieran, for the last 3 or so months of 2024, I started to uncover a lot of different layers in my life where I felt guilt or shame and I wasn't accepting myself. And as I worked through that, I started to become a lot kinder. I was more appreciative. I had gratitude for who I am, who I've become throughout my own journey. And with that, I realized I didn't really need my eyelash extensions anymore. They weren't serving a purpose in my life. And so I got them removed. And ever since not having them, it's like I've just unlocked this other layer of my life where I finally truly love and accept myself as who I am. And there was a time I guested on a podcast episode and I just was explaining how I really struggled to accept and love and appreciate myself for who I am. And that ended up turning me into a very high achiever. I felt I needed to prove a lot of things. It was just really, really sad, to be honest. But now my priorities have really changed. And if I didn't do that work to focus on my own self-worth, I probably wouldn't have had half the success I have moving into 2025. I released a lot of money mindset blocks. I released a lot of imposter syndrome. And as a result, I stopped holding myself back and was able to make the decisions or take action in places where I would usually go, oh, no, it's okay. I'm going to keep myself safe. I'm comfortable here. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we always get caught up in these different cycles where we'll be hustling and grinding and we're on top of the world. And then maybe we fall into this cycle where we feel like everything's hard. We start comparing ourselves to other people and we go to a really dark place. And it's just knowing how to have the right tools to be able to pull yourself out of that place and continue on your mission, whatever that may be. So now I don't have eyelash extensions and my priorities have shifted. So the things that I have noticed as my priorities have shifted is that instead of spending a lot of money on beauty services and the need to fit in, I'm actually focusing on what I truly value and love in life, which is being able to travel. I love new experiences. I love going and doing fun outdoorsy activities and trying different food. I also love the opportunity to be able to invest. I have really loved learning about investing. It's like being able to put the money you're making now aside for the future so that you can buy back time And so I've been investing money in an ETF. I've got 6.5 grand in there at the moment. It's made over $800 in the last 12 months, which I'm really stoked with. And I know it may not sound like much. However, you got to start somewhere, right? Like, it's actually more building that habit of thinking. So my goal is to have $10,000 in it. I was thinking by the end of 2025, but I reckon if I do that before the end of the financial year, I'll be very impressed with that. I also have $1,000 in crypto, which has been really interesting, just learning about blockchain technology. Obviously, I love AI, but really understanding like what's coming next. Because if you don't seek to understand or learn it, you could potentially miss out on some of the biggest opportunities of our lifetimes as we know it. So I like to look back in history and think about what happened in the 1920s. We had the Roaring Twenties, where there was the Industrial Revolution. You know, machines and factories were becoming a thing, and they were able to mass produce cars. There were just so many opportunities there that now we're seeing the new age of technology and where that's taking us. So to be able to invest in that, I think will be really beneficial. Yes, you might win some, you might lose some, but you've got to take the risk to have a chance, right? And then on top of that, I also think for me, I prioritize a lot more time for self-care, which is something that I didn't get much of last year. And so I don't know about you, but sometimes I would just find myself like always overstimulated. And it was because I was creating these environments where I'm just putting myself constantly under more pressure. So if I had a moment to myself where I could choose to just sit down, relax, do nothing, I would pick my phone up and start doom scrolling. I would listen to a podcast, put an audiobook on, put YouTube on. I'd call someone. There was always something going on that was taking up my mind, and it would always have a million thoughts going through my head. And I just never had that time to process or peace or clarity. And so as time's gone on, I've realized there's so much power in creating space for yourself and just being able to have, 10 to 15 minutes a day, not on your phone, not talking to anyone, not listening to podcasts, not playing music, not having a Netflix show on, and just literally processing your thoughts, like what's coming up for you. Notice what you're noticing. And that will allow you to actually process all the thoughts and feelings and emotions. And when you can do that, you can actually be able to show up as a better person, because you're not always suppressing everything. You're not always avoiding it to the point where it builds up so much and it like freaks you the hell out. So those are some really interesting things that have changed for me. And I'm also really excited to announce I am going on holiday in May until June. So I'm going to do a whole month traveling Vietnam with Nick. And I'm just so excited because I went there 2 years ago with my best friend and we had a blast. We were definitely partying a lot more, and I got so sick. Like, if you have been following my journey of travels, Bali and I are not friends. So sorry, Bali, you're off the list for a long time. However, when I went to Vietnam, I had the best time of my life, yet I probably did get really sick. Probably worse than Bali, but it was so worth it. Like Bali, it was not worth it. Vietnam, I ended up getting, didn't know at the time, but after I got my test results back, I found out I had salmonella. I got like a chest infection. I ended up getting conjunctivitis. And then, I think there was a couple other things, but I was so sick. It wasn't funny. And I kept pushing through. Oh, and I also went on this massive hike and my foot pretty much got infected from a blister I had. So this time I'm going a lot more planned and prepared. Got my medical kit, going to make sure I'm taking probiotics a while before, and I feel a lot more prepared for it this time, let's say. So that's exciting. And then also on a really positive note as well, in January I sold out my one-on-one consulting and coaching, which I'm so grateful for the clients I have because they are so high quality. Like, I can't even begin to describe to you, but when I started my career in coaching, I always doubted myself and I would charge cheaper prices, and I just didn't have the credibility or the reps in yet. But as my journey's gone on, I've definitely developed my own confidence, my own systems and processes, and to now be working with really high level people, it's super fulfilling. A massive shout out to Courtney, Mel, Annaline, Leanna, Eliza, Sam, Clarissa, and Shioni. I have absolutely adored working with you. It's been incredible to see what we can work on already in the first month of the year with looking at branding, diving deep into the numbers, building authority, and most of all, just creating a business that actually works for your lifestyle instead of burning out, working hard and not seeing any return on all the effort you put in. It's actually creating the business that supports the lifestyle you want to create and aligning that to your own values and your mission. So really grateful for that. But that is the wrap up of my personal update for you. In today's episode, I wanted to talk about hiring because for a lot of people, they have big goals when it comes to revenue, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a home salon, and that's not ideally who I would want listening to this podcast. This podcast is really for the people who want to evolve past that level. They are looking at growing a team. They want to be seen as an authority in the industry. They are an industry professional. They value upskilling. They value becoming the best at what they do. And with that amount of growth, you're obviously not going to be able to do it all on your own. And this is what really separates the professional business owner or entrepreneur from the person running a side hustle or treating their business as a hobby. So why would you want to look at hiring? If you're naturally good at what you do and you understand how to market well, you offer an incredible client experience and word's getting out, what you'll start to notice is people want to book with you. Your demand's growing, you're trying to keep up with all the clients, and maybe you're feeling like you're a little bit overworked, you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're realizing that, look, I probably can handle this high level of clientele for a while. However, long term, I'm going to burn out. My back's not going to be okay. I'm going to have nerve pain or something like that, because that's definitely how I felt. And being able to take on a team member can be both an incredibly exciting, but also scary journey, especially if you've never done it before. Even the people that have done it, I think if you don't have a system or a process and you're just winging it the entire time, that can also come at a detriment to the business. And I'll explain a few scenarios of my own personal experience and also things I've seen working with some of the clients I've had over time. But it's really important that you understand why you're hiring, what you're looking to achieve, and finding the right person to fit that role. So when I first looked at Wild West Bowling, I was starting to think about, how are we going to run this? Because it is realistically a massive business, right? You have 4 different streams of income. You've got bowling, you've got arcade and amusement games, you have a restaurant/cafe, and then you also have a bar. Now, previously, whenever we ran events or other businesses, if it was events, we would be outsourcing and have a team of security. We'd hire a team of bar staff. We would hire a couple people to help at the front gate. When we were previously running any of our other businesses, they were never big enough for us to take on a team. So we just had each family member, so myself, my brother, my mum and my dad, we would all get in there every single weekend and be working. Now, when you're running a big operation, you start to realize that, hey, Sammy lives in Perth. My mum is a nurse. She works 3 days a week. My brother, he's an electrician. He does FIFO. And then you've got my dad who has worked every single day for the last 17 years, probably taken less than 14 days off because he's always had responsibilities to run with the business and he's just burned himself into the ground. And so as a business coach, knowing what I know now and also being at the age where I have that authority to make the decisions in the business, it's been a big blessing to be able to take control over the hiring process. So first off, I needed to look at realistically, what do we need in terms of support and finances to be able to have a team on board? So you can go one or two ways. You can have a skeleton crew, as in you kind of have the bare minimum, you're all getting by, you're probably working a little bit harder, or you could go the opposite way and just overhire, and then you're just spending a whole bunch of money and struggling to get through. For me, I was looking at what are the different departments we have within the business? How important are they? How flexible could someone be in between roles? Or is it they need to just be the expert in that one area and only focus on that? And then what are the award wages? What are the different grades, categories? Like, how do we make sure that this is financially sustainable for us? So if you're a beauty salon, it depends on what level you're at. But ideally, I want you to think about how would your business run well? Like if you were fully booked, how many team members would you roughly have? Would you have someone on reception? Would you have a manager? Would you have a coordinator? What roles and responsibilities would you need to have within the business? And I think when you actually spend some time brainstorming that, it gives you a lot of clarity. So for me, I started to look at the different departments. So bowling, we need someone who is front of house. They are on the counter. So you would compare this to having a receptionist in a beauty salon. So the person who is taking the sales, who is managing bookings, that is your front of house person, your receptionist. Then I've got to look at the kitchen. So how many people do I need in the kitchen? If it's busy, how many people? And if it's quiet, how many people? So I started to see how it would run when you've got one person, and it's okay if it's quiet, but if it's busy, you realistically need two people. So one person will be prepping and serving the food, and then the other person will be cooking. So that's two people there. Then we've got the bar. So we've got to think about, well, how does the bar run? How many people do we need? Once again, is it quiet? Is it busy? So we started to think, well, we need the bar manager, but realistically, the bar manager has to be scanning through the crowd every 15 minutes to check, is anyone intoxicated or not? And if so, how do we manage that? Do we kick them out, or do we need to pull back their drinks? And then you've also got someone who's like physically on the bar at all times. And then lastly, what are the other roles that might need to be done? Well, it would ideally be great to have someone who is really providing that customer service. So they're troubleshooting any problems on the lanes. And if you're to look at a beauty salon, I would be thinking about, well, okay, who is managing the bookings here? How is that running? Who have I got in the different rooms? Now, are they specialized in some kind of way, or are they meant to be a one-stop shop, can do everything? So if I was running a beauty salon, here are the things that I would be looking at when it comes to structuring my team. So firstly, you would need someone who is on front of house. If you have a big team, it's not going to be of value for you to have senior therapists who are sitting at front of house when they could be on the tools, servicing clients, making more money. I would have someone who is maybe studying or who is an incredible customer service provider who is really outgoing and bubbly. That person would be on front of house, doing reception, taking bookings, potentially processing payments. Otherwise, you could have the therapist who provide the service, processing the payments. That's dependent upon how you want to run things. But you really need that person who is front-facing in the business. And that's something that a lot of people have kind of gone, oh, is it worth it? And you've got to weigh up, what kind of customer experience do I want to provide? If you have high demand, people are coming through the door, people are walking out, it's nice to have someone within the first 5 seconds being able to greet them, to be able to let them know to take a seat, let them know when they're ready to go in. Like that is one thing to also consider. But a second thing to consider is when you're getting calls, when you're getting text messages, when you're getting DMs on Instagram, managing emails, like having someone doing that full time can save you from missing out on potential bookings and revenue for the business. In terms of the actual team of service providers, It depends on what kind of business you have. Like, are you specifically focusing on one type of service or one niche of services? So, for example, you might be cosmetic tattooing. So is everyone there a cosmetic tattoo artist? Do you have a couple specialists who only do brows? Do you have a couple specialists who only do lips? And then maybe someone who does eyeliner, or are they doing everything? Like, you've got to consider what type of experience and what kind of specialty you want to bring into the business. Because if you have specialists, if you have people who are the best of the best, then obviously that is going to allow you to have a higher brand reputation and be able to charge a more premium price point. So I would avoid having 5 all-rounders, just because if I'm a customer coming in, I'm not really going to have full confidence that you're the best at what you do, unless you've got a few all-rounders, but then you have a couple of specialists. So it's completely dependent upon what niche you're in and where you want to sit in the market and what kind of level or quality you want from your artists. That's something I would be considering. Then I would be looking at, okay, who is managing my staff? Because if it's not you, the business owner, you don't have time because maybe you want to work on other projects. Maybe you're launching a product. Maybe you're offering trainings. Maybe you are coaching. I'm not sure what it is you may want to get up to outside of the salon. However, it's going to be really hard for you to try be a manager, be across everything, and then also work on those other projects. And so that's where it's great to hire a manager. Now, I hired a manager 3 weeks ago. He started with us full time and he is incredible. I am able to trust him because of the amount of years of experience he has, and because of his skill set, he's an expert at what he does, that I can run the business remotely. So if you have a great manager, they should be able to run this business without you being there. And if you're someone who wants to take a holiday, who wants to be able to work on another project, who wants to be able to take a week off and spend time with their family, you're not going to be able to do it if you don't have a manager. Now, something I see happen a bit in beauty is the mistake of looking at your therapists and going, who's been working here the longest, or who's the most senior out of everyone in terms of experience, and then promoting them to manager. Now, this could be detrimental to your business if they have no management skills. If they've never worked in a management position before and they've never had training, or you're not providing them with the training to be able to do that job properly, that can come at a massive cost to the business. Because being a manager and being on the tools as a therapist, a technician, or whatever you would classify your team as, it's not their skill set. And so taking someone who is working in your team and then promoting them to that management role, if they don't understand how to manage the team, it can actually create some internal conflicts. Firstly, everyone else is going to get jealous that they've been promoted. But secondly, they're not going to respect the manager because the manager isn't managing them correctly. And when I say manager, I also should preface that, a lot of people, they don't like being managed. They like leadership. And so instead of having the management title, which is what most people would refer to it as, so we have that common understanding, really you're looking for someone who's a leader, someone who can inspire the team, someone who really drives the growth and performance of the business because they are passionate, but they also support everyone's development. So when you've got that manager, they can help with all of your hiring. They can help with doing your screening. They can help with onboarding and training the team member. They are implementing the systems and processes in your business to ensure everything runs smoothly and efficiently. And so this is the benefit of having a manager. Like, you trying to do everything yourself can be incredibly overwhelming. And it's also not realistic for you to do that forever. If it doesn't come naturally to you as well, and you're trying to do it, but you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do a good job at it. And I think that's kind of where ego comes in. It's like, I have to do all these things myself, or I'm the only person that can do this and I'll do it the best. If you hire the right team, they should be better than you. You should be hiring A players, not B players or C players. You want to hire the best of the best. If you truly care about growing a successful business, you will hire people with different skill sets who are more experienced or more of an expert than you are. And if you're not doing that, then you should at least be preparing to give them the training to develop that skill set. So if you're just hiring people and thinking, oh, yep, I'm going to expect them to do all these things without giving them the support and training or ensuring they have that experience and expertise, then it's going to be a really, really hard time for you. Now, on top of having that manager, depending on how big the team size is, if you get from like that 5 to 10 plus, then you may look at having a team leader, clinic coordinator, someone who's essentially assisting the manager in being able to grow the team. Because there's a lot of different tasks that will start to come up in the business. And so if you can start thinking about what do you want your team to look like, what type of roles and responsibilities you need to fill, it starts to get easier because you see that long-term vision. And then you can kind of create the steps inside your head of, well, what position do I need to fill first? And once I build up that team member with bookings, then I can add this in. And what I like to do is do all the preparation first. So I think about, okay, well, what is this role? What is the title of it? Who do they report to? What value do they add to the business? What are the expectations or the responsibilities of them? How do I ensure that they are performing to the best of their ability? Like, what kind of measures of success would I have for them? Because this way you can start to understand like what is the importance of having them in the business. Then I like to think about how much is it actually going to cost me to have them on board and how often are they working? So is the role casual? Is it part-time? Is it full-time? And then if I look at the fair work, the wages, what grade they are, what their age is, I can start to get a better understanding of, okay, this is how much it's going to cost them at an hourly rate. Then I will factor in super. So super is currently 11.5% at the moment, and that will actually be going up to 12% as of 1st of July 2025. So if you're not aware of that, please make sure you're across it because it will also be an additional cost for your business. If you aren't going to factor it in, then definitely consider it because it does add up. Then I would also be looking at, are they working overtime at any stage? What are the penalty rates for that? I always do research on how many public holidays there are in the year so I can be proactive about what team I put on board. If you have a team and you decide to put everyone who is, late 20s to 40s on, it's going to obviously be a lot higher wage than if you were to have some of the apprentices on. And I'm, saying everyone has different skill sets and levels and age shouldn't be the thing. However, we all know that the older you are, generally speaking, in comparison to people who are just entering the workforce, it's a lot more expensive to have them on board. And so if you have to pay double time or time and a half and you have your most expensive or senior employees on, that can be a really expensive public holiday for you. So just being able to think about those things and plan in advance is really important. And if you're not doing that, then do you have a manager who's doing that and being able to notify you? So once we've kind of got these things together and we're thinking about how much our employees are costing us, we've got to know our weekly break-even costs. So a lot of people don't know this in the industry. If you're someone who really struggles with understanding numbers and has no idea how much it's actually costing you to run your business, I highly recommend downloading a free copy of my business break-even analysis spreadsheet because it's going to show you exactly how much it costs you to run your business on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. So all you need to do is go into the spreadsheet, you choose the expense category, you then write what the expense is. So it might be rent, and then you're able to choose the frequency. So is it monthly, yearly, weekly, and then just write in how much it is. Then the calculator will automatically show you how much it costs weekly, monthly, and yearly for that one expense. but down the bottom in the totals, it will show you the total amount. And so what you can actually do is you leverage this calculator and then factor in a new person's wage so you can see how much that impacts your break-even cost. This is exactly what I did with Wild West Bowling, and it was an absolute game changer because it ensured that we were able to hire staff in a way that didn't send us broke. So it's very different for every business, right? Knowing whether you can afford to bring a staff member on or not. And in an ideal world, you'd like to have at least, 2 to 3 months of their wage in savings. If anything were to happen, if you were to get sick, if the business had to close, like you've got a nice cash buffer there. I would not just be investing in a big fit out and hiring a team with no demand. If you don't have the demand of bookings, if you're not fully booked, you don't have a wait list, then just going and bringing new team on could be detrimental, especially if you don't have a lead generation system in place to continually have new clients booking in. So just something to consider. Obviously, it can be really exciting to bring that team member on, but you also need to have the demand there. Otherwise, it's going to cost you more than it's worth. So building up a nice cash buffer, if anything were to happen, is important. So let's actually talk the hiring cycle. So step 1 is your planning and prep. So that's essentially what we just covered in the conversation up until now. Then we've got your advertising and shortlisting. So this would include you having a job description, you being able to put your advertisement out there and see who actually applies. Now, when you're writing a job description, I think a lot of people make their job descriptions really clinical and boring. And I think you've also got to consider what type of brand you have. So people want to work for your business. They want to be involved. If you are really fun and exciting, you need your job description to show that. If you offer a lot of trainings, you've got a lot of staff bonding activities and opportunities to grow within the business, then advertising that in the benefits is going to be to your advantage. I think way too often people just write about the company in a very clinical way, and then they just write out what certifications you need and then say apply now. If you're writing a job description like that, no wonder why most people go to work for themselves. It's like, why would I want to work? I think some incredible brands out there have done so well with their marketing in terms of showing what it's like to work for them and their team, what it's like to be a part of that family. And, people want to apply because they're like, that's the vibe I want to be around. I want to be in a healthy, exciting, and fun workplace. And so whether you realize it or not, the marketing you do on your social media channels is actually going to influence the type of talent you attract. If you have people knocking on your door saying, I want to work for you, it's because you've been doing something right in your marketing. If you're getting crickets when you're advertising job roles, it's probably because your marketing sucks. You don't have a brand or your job description, like no one wants to work with you because it seems really boring. And so you have to be more exciting and more fun or offer better opportunities than other workplaces, because beauty has a harder time trying to attract and retain top quality staff. If you are not a great leader, if you don't look after your team, if you don't provide them with opportunities to grow personally and professionally, then they're not going to stay long term. And this is why we see a lot of people go out on their own and leave, because they weren't getting a good experience in their workplace. They weren't growing as a person. They weren't enjoying it. It was a toxic culture. So I really need you to think about doing a reflection on your brand. What is the best part about working for you? What type of culture do you have? What are the benefits to the employee? Same thing as when you're marketing your services. You need to market the position in your business and make it really appealing and juicy. So obviously put your job advertisement out there and then you start getting applications. So you've got to sift through. I would really be looking at the skill set. I'd be looking at even little things, if someone, I'll give a great example. I got this job application from someone, and in the key skills, it said attention to detail. And then it also said teamwork and collaboration. And then like 4 dots down, it said collaboration and teamwork. And then I was looking through and there were missing capital letters, missing full stops, words not spelt correctly. And I was like, there's a big incongruency here between attention to detail and there actually being attention to detail. And so really being able to filter through those applications can save you a lot of time. A little tip here is when I look at employees, I like to look at their extracurricular activities. If they do a musical instrument, if they play a sport, if they do something that shows they have their own sense of initiative or creativity or dedication, that is something that I go, cool, they have discipline. If they have discipline, they're usually a driven person. They're a high performer. And that's the type of person that I want to attract into my business. I don't really go, oh, wow, in their spare time, they're an influencer. It just doesn't really tick the boxes for me. I think as well, if you have people who have a poor track record of keeping jobs, sometimes that can be a bit of a red flag because maybe they have mental health issues, maybe they don't have a drive, maybe they are a toxic person and they don't get along with other team members. Like, I can say these things because it's what I've seen and it comes from my experience. It is not a stereotype. It is not putting anyone down. It is just calling it as I've seen it. And I think if you go through this enough times, you'll start to pick up who looks like a great candidate versus who doesn't. So obviously you're going to have a few people that may catch your eye a bit more. And what I like to do is have a quick phone call and just see how they answer the phone. What's their tone of voice like? How do they respond? Are they professional? How do they respond with getting put on the spot? Like it's great to have that little phone call to just see what type of person they are because it's completely unannounced. You can then start to say, all right, do you want to do an interview? You may choose to do this in person. You may choose to do it online, depending on how much time you have. And then you can kind of do a screening of who the best quality candidates were based on who you called over the phone. And then you move into the interviews and selection process. So who do you actually call in to have an interview? Making sure that when you're doing these interviews, they are quite structured. So you can obviously ask different questions within the interview. And I think this is completely dependent on the role you're hiring for. So I like to ask a mix of questions. Sometimes if I know the role is based around being in a team, I will ask them how they've previously performed in a team, give me some examples. Then I might ask some questions about how they handle pressure. What's their process when they're stressed out? What do they do? How do they handle that situation? And then there's other times where I might test their skills. So I'll get them to complete a task and I'll watch how they complete it. And that way I'm able to evaluate how they perform. So there's different types of question categories that you can ask when you're hiring. I would potentially be doing competency questions. So you can use ChatGPT to help you come up with some questions. So there's competency questions. You've got behavioral-based questions, and then you've got skills testing. So depending on what you're hiring for, I would be using ChatGPT to help put some questions together if you're unsure of what to ask. And based on the answers it gives you, you can be able to choose or filter out which ones are most relevant. Another thing here is to really make sure you're checking in on what their long-term goals are. This is something that I find can save you from a lot of pain. So an example of this is if you say, what are your long-term goals? And they go, I don't really have any, then they're probably not a very driven person. If you say, what are your long-term goals? And they say, well, I'm actually planning to go to Europe for summer for 3 months, then that can help you weigh up the decision of like, is this the person I'm going to go with or not? You might hear them talk about they've got uni, they've got breaks, or maybe They also work FIFO, they have kids. Like, you just need to understand the person's situation and what their availability is before you hire. Because if you hire them and you don't understand what their goals are, their availability and things, sometimes they might just go, yep, I'm resigning. And you're like, holy shit, I just spent all this time pouring my energy and effort into training you and now you're leaving me. And that's everyone's worst fear, right? They pour their heart and soul into training up their team and then they're left with nothing. So ask the questions first and get an understanding. I always like to think about, how can we support you if you're feeling really stressed? What would we need to do for you to leave this job? And that will give you an understanding of, how much work can they take on? And, if they're going to be having 5 days a week and they're booked, are they always taking a mental health day off, or are they calling in sick, or are they going out and partying or something? It's not stuff that you'd hope people don't do this stuff, but they do. And I've seen it happen in beauty, people that say, oh, I'm sick today because they went out partying, or, it's really good to get an understanding of this person and what their values are, what they do in their spare time, and how that's going to also bring value to the team. Don't just ask basic questions. Ask questions that you want to know the answers to now, not find out as a nasty surprise, 6 to 12 months down the road. So after you've done your interviews, you're obviously going to find that, hey, this person really stood out to me. This one's like a no. You might have two people that you just can't decide between. And so you might call them in for a second interview or conversation and then be able to skills test and pick from there. Once you've selected that person, you then need to offer and onboard them. So then you've got your offer and onboard. Now, this is something that I just learned about more recently, is what you actually need to send to someone when you take them on as an employee. So there were a few things I knew, like obviously I need their BSB and account number to be able to pay them. I need their tax file number. I need to send them a letter of offer to let them know that they've got the job, and then obviously a contract. However, there were a couple of things that kind of slipped my mind in the process, and that was giving them the Fair Work information statement that is required by law for you to provide that when you hire someone. Also giving them a copy of your employee handbook and having them sign off on that so they understand what the expectations of being in that business are, working for that company, how you take leave, how you notify about being sick, like all of that stuff. That needs to be put in an employee handbook, which was something that I had to build out. And if you need help with that and you're a one-on-one client, I will just give you mine because it is a big task. But it's also important for you to have that employee handbook and have them sign off on that, because if anything were to ever happen with Fair Work or, your workers' comp insurance, they will be asking you, what did they sign up, or what information were they provided it with when they signed up with you? And that's including things like sexual harassment laws and policies, and then also anti-discrimination. So if you haven't got something like that in your business and you've already got employees and stuff, I would probably be looking at it. It's not like, here's the thing, it's like, it doesn't matter too much, like I've got along this far. And it's like, you think it doesn't matter until something happens and then you get pulled up on it and you need it there. So that is something that I would consider definitely getting onto ASAP if you haven't. And also, if you're looking at hiring, these are things that you can start building before you have the team, before you do all the hiring. So employee handbook, then also remember how we were talking about all your different roles and responsibilities? You should have the role listed out and what the description of that role is. And so every time you hire someone, you're able to physically hand them a sheet of paper which give them that information, and then they need to sign off it to say that they understand what is expected of them and what they will be doing within the business. So just to recap, making sure you've got the letter of offer, the contract, copy of the role description, employee handbook to sign off on, and the Fair Work information statement. So there's a Fair Work information statement for part-time and full-time employees, and then there's also a separate one for casual employees. So as you've onboarded them, you've got to consider what kind of onboarding process or experience you are giving your team members. So, going and expecting someone to just be thrown in the deep end and just start working, some people do it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do it. Someone knows within the first week if they're going to stay with your business long term or if they're going to leave. And that is purely dependent on how you treat them in the onboarding phase of their journey. So you've got to consider, what does their first day look like when they're working with you? Are you guiding them? Are you having a full day committed to their training? Are they needing to watch video trainings? Do you give them some hands-on training? What are you doing to ensure they feel supported? Because if they don't feel supported and they feel scared to ask questions, they feel really overwhelmed, it's not going to set a good tone moving forwards. So I would have an actual plan. Let's say your first month of having an employee. What does the first day look like? How are we settling them in? How are we testing their skills? How are we training them to be aligned with the way we do things? So if you've got a certain way of performing treatments, if you've got a certain way of tidying up the rooms and making sure everything is clean, if you have a certain way of processing sales and rebooking clients, teaching them how to use the booking system, all of these things are really important. And if you just go, hey, you've got clients now, good luck, it's not going to be a great experience for them. And, they're probably not going to love their job. They're probably going to feel a little bit neglected. And, is that kind of the workplace that they're going to want to stay loyal to long time? Not really. So then moving on from the first week, what are you doing in the second week? Are they feeling a bit more confident now? Are we starting to give them a little bit more responsibility? And then, towards the end of the month, what are we doing to check back in with them? And then this check-in process, this should be something that you're doing with all of your employees. So that leads us into the next part of the hiring cycle, which is employment and engagement. So you're obviously employing these people long-term. How are you checking in with them? So you should be doing team meetings. You should do monthly one-on-ones. Are you doing team huddles in the morning to make sure that everyone is always on the same page? Any issues, concerns, or challenges coming up are able to be addressed promptly. You're not waiting until the end of the month to be able to bring it up, or it gets forgotten about and more time passes and then it builds up and there's extra resentment. How are you structuring the management and leadership of your team? Because if you don't have those one-on-ones, if you don't have those team meetings, you're not checking in with them, how are you meant to know how everything's performing? How are you meant to improve? There should be a form of reflection. I always like to ask the question, what's working well right now? What are we doing that's creating more wins in the business? What's not working? What things are going wrong? What things need to be fixed? What can be improved? So how are we making changes? What are we trialing and testing? What are we doing differently to make improvements? And then what do we learn? Is there a lesson? Is there something we can take away from this? How can we share that lesson with everyone so that the business can continue to grow and develop? So with your employment and engagement, obviously, you will probably at some stage have a team member want to leave. They put in their resignation. So you've also got to consider, what does that offboarding process look like? How are you going to manage them leaving? Do they need to hand in certain things? Do they need to give access, or do you need to change passwords to accounts? What are you doing to make sure that when they leave, everything is on good terms? Yes, I said good terms. If you're having bad terms, in all circumstances as a business owner, you should be the bigger person. I know it can be really hard with some team members, but all in all, you want to make sure that if you are offboarding someone, if you are letting them go, that everything is in writing so that there is a paper trail of what you've said and how it's been handled, and you are doing it in a professional manner. So that is a bit of a recap of what it looks like at a glance to start hiring people and growing your team. As the business owner, you have the responsibility of leading the strategy. You also need to understand finances, the strategy. You also need to understand finances, how you're doing your hiring strategy, what the goal is long-term that you're working towards. You're going to be designing these roles. You're going to have the final say on the offer. So if your manager is doing all the hiring for you and, you've got someone who's coming back with they want to get paid more or they want flexibility with this, at the end of the day, it will come up to you to make those decisions as a leader. And also you have ownership over the staff. So just make sure you understand that what you're creating, how you're running things, it's all done within your brand. And then also, what does it look like if people want to exit your brand? And what I mean by this is, have you considered, is everyone setting up Instagram accounts when they work for you? Do you keep them or do they keep them? Do you get to have ownership over the work, the photos they take, or do they get ownership? These are all little things that I've actually seen a really nasty side of contracts from a previous beauty business owner that I know of. And yeah, her contracts were just crazy. It was like, you can't work within 20 kilometers of the salon. If you leave the business, you're not allowed to work as a therapist, artist, technician for the next 2 years. And yeah, some of the contracts are like absolutely crazy. And I think you have to be firm in what you're saying, but also, you can't be a psycho, like a control freak. Like, those things are completely out of your control. Like, that contract is not going to hold up in court. So making sure that, with your contracts and your expectations, that you are fair as a leader. The better relationship you create with your staff and your employees, if they leave on good terms, they may come back at some stage. They may think the grass is greener somewhere else or working by themselves, and then they realize how hard it is and what it's like to actually be a business owner, and they may come back. Like, I never want to burn a bridge with someone, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future and how that can impact you. And so being really professional, creating opportunities for your team members, it can be hard. You're scared of pouring your heart and soul into your team and then having them leave you and having to restart again and go through all of that. But that's part of being a business owner. It actually happens to everyone. And I think if you are the type of person who holds back a lot and doesn't give to their team, who doesn't encourage them to grow and teach them new skills and offer them opportunities, then they're not going to stay with you long term. However, the people who feel really valued and supported, and they love being in your work environment because of the culture you've created and the standards, that's when you see the staff retention lasts. I think there's another thing to be spoken about when it comes to people who build personal brands and then have team working under them. And this is what I've noticed, the difference between someone who is like Sammy Kennedy Beauty Artistry, for example, versus like a brand name, Beauty Industry Leaders. Some people may go to you as a brand at first because you have this prestigious personal brand. They want to work underneath you. But if you own a personal brand, you always charge higher than your team members. And there's always this discrepancy. Like, even the senior team members don't get any price point near yours. They're always going to feel like they're beneath you. And this is when you have people leave because they don't feel valued. They don't feel like they're ever going to be seen as equal. And then their boss is always away doing all these, influencer gigs or having all these incredible opportunities while the team are fully booked back to back. There's no Christmas parties. There's no, team development days. Like, these are big red flags for any employees, and they start to build up the resentment and they start to leave. So on top of all this hiring stuff we're covering, I think you've also got to think about how you're nurturing your team, how you're creating that culture, what kind of work environment do you want, and how are you being a great leader? And with that being said, in our space, if you have demand but you're not willing to be a leader, if you're not willing to learn the skills, if you're not willing to change your mindset, you're not willing to grow as a person, you're not willing to actually learn how to be a leader, then it can become a massive detriment to your business. Because if you can't lead people and you don't want to learn, see, there's a difference here. If you can't lead people but you're going to learn and you're putting in the effort and you're making mistakes along the way, then that's fine. You're trying, you're learning, you're improving. But if you're the type of person who goes, I just want more money, I'll bring more team on and they'll make me more money, and then you don't look after them, that's when you get a bad name for yourself. That's when people leave you. That's when you're in a very scary financial position sometimes. So I know we covered a lot there. I kind of went on massive tangents. However, if you're thinking of hiring, I want you to just start off with, what does the long-term goal look like? And who do I need to help me get there? And then start mapping out your hiring process, the strategy, the steps I walk through, like how are you going to run each stage of that strategy in your business? It's going to be unique to everyone. You'll figure out that some things work really well and others don't. And that's the whole point, it's never going to be perfect. But last piece of advice is, don't just hire someone because you think they'll be great and you'll just create a role for them. Always have the role in mind first and know the exact skill set, qualifications that are needed for that. Because if you don't and you just go, I'll just hire this friend or family member or whoever, that can also be a big cost to the business and also ruin that relationship. So I hope you found value in this episode. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could please go on to Apple Podcasts, type in Beauty Industry Leaders, and leave a 5-star review on how you've been finding listening to this show. It has been, I think almost 7, going on 8 months now, which is absolutely amazing. We've hit over 30 episodes, so the show is growing. If you know anyone else who would benefit from listening to these episodes, please send it to them. The more we can spread this information, the more we can build awareness around how to run a business, and we can all raise the standards of the industry together. So that's my one request from you. Also, if you are someone who would like to connect and potentially be a guest on the show, please send me a DM at Sammy Kennedy Coach on Instagram. I am looking for my next round of guests to interview. I haven't had anyone from PMU, so if you're from PMU, I'd be really interested to find someone from there. I'd love to get in touch with someone who is creating a beauty product. And I also would be really interested in interviewing someone who is an apprentice, whether that's in hair or beauty, and just talking about their experience with being pretty much probably a Gen Z they would be, and what it's like. I think those would be really interesting guests to have. They're kind of be in the back of my mind scouting for. So if you know anyone or you are that person yourself, please send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to connect with you. Other than that, thank you for showing up to this episode. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will catch you for the next one. Bye now.
Audience exclusive.